Behind the golden gates of Windermere Palace, where ancient traditions meet modern scandals, a single code word holds the power to shatter a kingdom. When Prince Alexander's phone buzzes with an incoming call from his estranged brother, Prince Sebastian, the palace guards don't just spring into action. They activate a secret protocol that has been years in the making. Code Blue activated echoes through the marble corridors, setting in motion a chain of events that will expose family secrets, test royal loyalties, and threaten the very foundation of the monarchy itself. What started as sibling rivalry has evolved into something far more dangerous, and tonight, the crown's most closely guarded secret is about to be revealed. The grandfather clock in the Grand Hall of Windermere Palace chimed 11 times as Prince Alexander Windsor Ashford paced nervously across the Persian rug that had witnessed 3 centuries of royal footsteps. His polished black shoes clicked against the marble floor with each hurried step. The ornate mirrors lining the walls reflected his anxiety back at him from multiple angles, showing a man who looked far older than his 38 years. Alexander paused at the towering windows overlooking the palace gardens, where moonlight cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured hedges. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of London's skyline, a reminder of the millions of subjects who looked to the royal family for stability and leadership. The weight of that responsibility had never felt heavier than it did tonight. The buzz of his encrypted phone shattered the silence. Alexander's stomach dropped as he saw the name flashing on the screen. Sebastian. His younger brother, the spare heir, the one who had chosen exile over duty 3 years ago, the one whose very existence had become a threat to everything the monarchy represented. Alexander's finger hovered over the decline button, but he knew avoiding Sebastian wouldn't make their problems disappear. Instead, he pressed the emergency alert button hidden beneath his phone case, a device installed by the palace security team after Sebastian's last unexpected visit had merely caused an international incident. Within seconds, the response was swift and coordinated. Captain James Harrison, head of the Royal Protection Unit, appeared in the doorway with military precision. His steel-gray eyes met Alexander's, and without a word he spoke into his radio. Code Blue activated. All units to positions. Prince Sebastian is attempting contact. The phrase Code Blue had been Harrison's creation, developed during those tumultuous months after Sebastian's dramatic departure from royal life. It wasn't just about security. It was about damage control, media management, and protecting the crown from Sebastian's increasingly erratic behavior. Every guard, every staff member, every protocol officer knew exactly what those 2 words meant. Prepare for chaos. Alexander finally answered the call, his voice carefully controlled despite the turmoil in his chest. Sebastian, hello, brother. Sebastian's voice carried that familiar mixture of charm and defiance that had gotten him into trouble since childhood. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Oh, wait, everything you do is important, isn't it? Crown Prince duties and all that. Through the phone speaker, Alexander could hear background noise, music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Sebastian was clearly at some sort of social gathering, probably another one of his infamous parties that regularly made headlines in the tabloids. The thought made Alexander's jaw clench. "Where are you?" Alexander asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Does it matter?" "I'm calling because I have something you need to hear. Something about our dear departed father and the real reason he changed his will 6 months before he died." Alexander's blood ran cold. Their father, King Edmund IV, had passed away just 18 months ago, leaving behind a carefully crafted succession plan that had seemed straightforward. Alexander would inherit the throne as tradition dictated, while Sebastian would maintain his minor royal duties from a respectful distance. But Sebastian's hint about a changed will sent alarm bells ringing through Alexander's mind. "What are you talking about?" Alexander demanded, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Captain Harrison, who had been monitoring the conversation from across the room, immediately began typing rapidly on his secure tablet. Code Blue Protocol included real-time transcript analysis and threat assessment. Every word Sebastian spoke was being recorded, analyzed, and cross-referenced with intelligence reports about his recent activities. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about," Sebastian continued, his tone growing more serious. "The private meeting with the Archbishop, the sealed documents in Father's study, the conversation you had with Prime Minister Blackwood 3 days after the funeral." Alexander's mind raced. How could Sebastian possibly know about any of those things? The meeting with the archbishop had been arranged to discuss the coronation ceremony. The sealed documents were standard royal paperwork. And his conversation with the prime minister had been about routine governmental transitions. But Sebastian's knowledge of these events suggested he had sources inside the palace, sources that the security team had failed to identify. Sebastian, if you have something to say it clearly. I don't have time for your games. Games? Sebastian laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think this is a game? Alexander, our entire family is built on games, lies, secrets, and the biggest secret of all is about to come out. Through the windows, Alexander could see additional security personnel taking positions around the palace grounds. Code Blue wasn't just about protecting against Sebastian's physical presence. It was about protecting against the damage his words could cause. In the modern age, a single phone call could destroy reputations, topple governments, and shake the foundations of institutions that had stood for centuries. I'm listening, Alexander said finally, settling into one of the antique chairs that had been occupied by countless monarchs before him. 3 months ago, I hired a private investigator, Sebastian began. Not for anything dramatic, just to help me understand some financial irregularities in my trust fund. But what he found was much more interesting than missing money. He found correspondence, letters between father and certain members of parliament, documents that suggest our dear late king wasn't quite as committed to traditional succession laws as everyone believed. Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. That's impossible, is it? Remember when father started talking about modernizing the monarchy during his final year? Everyone assumed he meant updating ceremonial protocols and social media presence. But what if he meant something much more fundamental? Captain Harrison approached Alexander and silently handed him a note. Tech team is tracing the call. Sebastian is calling from the Meridian Hotel in Geneva. Swiss authorities have been notified. Alexander nodded grimly. Geneva meant Sebastian was likely meeting with his lawyer, a sharp-tongued Swiss attorney named Helena Richter, who specialized in international inheritance disputes. If Sebastian was building a legal case against the succession, Helena Richter was exactly the kind of lawyer who could make it happen. Sebastian, even if father had second thoughts about succession, which I doubt, the law is clear. The crown passes to the eldest legitimate heir. That's been the rule for centuries. But what if the eldest heir isn't as legitimate as everyone thinks? The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. His vision blurred for a moment, and he gripped the arm of his chair to steady himself. The implication was devastating, not just personally, but for the entire monarchy. If there were questions about his legitimacy, it would create a constitutional crisis that could destroy the royal family's credibility forever. You're lying, Alexander said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Then explain why father spent his final months having private meetings with genealogy experts. Explain why he requested DNA testing for medical purposes that had nothing to do with his cancer treatment. Explain why the palace legal team has been quietly researching precedents for succession disputes. Alexander's mind reeled. He remembered his father's increased interest in family history during his final year, but he had attributed it to a dying man's natural desire to understand his legacy. The medical tests had seemed routine given the king's illness, and the legal research. Alexander hadn't been aware of any legal research. Captain Harrison was now speaking urgently into his radio, coordinating with intelligence services and legal advisors. The Code Blue protocol had escalated to its highest level, a potential threat to the crown itself. What do you want, Sebastian? Alexander asked quietly. I want the truth, and I want justice. If our father really did discover something that changes everything, then the people deserve to know. The Commonwealth deserves a legitimate monarch, not someone who inherited the crown through deception. And if you're wrong, if you're chasing conspiracy theories and destroying our family's reputation for nothing? Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a sadness that Alexander hadn't heard in years. Then I'll have lost the only brother I ever had. But if I'm right, Alex, if I'm right, then we've both been living a lie our entire lives. The call ended abruptly, leaving Alexander staring at his phone in the sudden silence of the grand hall. Around him, the palace had transformed into a crisis command center. Staff members moved with urgent purpose. Secure communications buzzed with encrypted messages, and Captain Harrison coordinated response teams with military efficiency. But for Alexander, the noise faded into background static. Sebastian's words echoed in his mind, raising questions he had never thought to ask. Questions about his identity, his right to the throne, and the secrets their father might have taken to his grave. As the first heir to the British throne in over 70 years, Alexander had spent his entire life preparing to be king. Every decision had been measured against his future role, every relationship evaluated for its impact on the crown. He had sacrificed personal happiness, endured media scrutiny, and dedicated himself completely to his royal duties. Now, with a single phone call, Sebastian had introduced the possibility that it had all been for nothing. Alexander stood slowly and walked to his father's portrait, which dominated one wall of the grand hall. King Edmund IV gazed back at him with the same blue eyes Alexander saw in the mirror each morning. Eyes that had witnessed decades of royal service, political upheaval, and family drama. But now those painted eyes seemed to hold secrets, and Alexander wondered what truths his father had discovered in those final months. Captain Harrison approached cautiously. "Your Highness, we've confirmed that Prince Sebastian is in Geneva with his legal team. Our intelligence suggests they've been gathering documents for several weeks. We need to discuss immediate response protocols." Alexander nodded absently, still staring at his father's portrait. "Captain, I need you to answer a question honestly. In all your years of service to the crown, have you ever had reason to doubt the legitimacy of the royal succession?" Harrison's expression remained carefully neutral, but Alexander caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or concern. "Sir, the Royal Protection Unit's job is to protect the crown and its occupants, regardless of political or legal complications. We serve the institution, not the individual." It wasn't exactly an answer, but it told Alexander everything he needed to know. Even his most trusted security advisor wasn't willing to guarantee the legitimacy of his claim to the throne. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over London. The city would soon wake up to another day under the reign of King Alexander I, a title he had held for 18 months. But as he stood in the grand hall, surrounded by centuries of royal history, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that his reign, and his entire identity, might be built on foundations far less solid than he had ever imagined. The Code Blue Protocol would remain in effect, the security teams would maintain their vigilance, and the palace would prepare for whatever Sebastian planned to do next. But deep in his heart, Alexander knew that the real battle wasn't about security or protocol, it was about truth. And truth, unlike royal decree, couldn't be controlled by palace walls or government influence. As the morning light streamed through the ancient windows, illuminating the portraits of monarchs past, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. He would find out what his father had discovered, even if it meant uncovering secrets that could destroy his world. Because whatever Sebastian knew, whatever documents he possessed, whatever truth he claimed to have uncovered, Alexander needed to know it too. The crown might be his birthright, but he was beginning to realize that birthright itself might be nothing more than an elaborate fiction. And if that was the case, then everything he had believed about himself, his family, and his destiny was about to change forever. The next 72 hours transformed Windermere Palace from a symbol of stability into a fortress under siege. Alexander had barely slept since Sebastian's call, spending his time poring over documents in his father's private study, a room that had remained sealed since the king's death 18 months earlier. What he found there challenged everything he thought he knew about his family's history. The study smelled of leather and aged paper, with towering bookshelves containing centuries of royal correspondence, private journals, and official documents. Alexander's father had been meticulous about record-keeping. But as Alexander searched through filing cabinets and desk drawers, he noticed significant gaps in the documentation from the king's final year. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, the palace's chief archivist and one of the few people Alexander trusted completely, worked alongside him in careful silence. She had served the royal family for over 30 years and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of royal documentation. Her growing concern was evident in the way her usually steady hands trembled slightly as she examined various papers. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, looking up from a leather-bound journal, "there are several entries here from your father's final months that, well, They're quite unusual. Alexander looked up from the financial documents he had been reviewing. Unusual how? Dr. Bronze said, talking about history. Thornfield adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and read carefully from the journal. March 15th last year. Your father wrote, met with Professor Davies from Cambridge regarding genealogical research. His findings are deeply troubling and require immediate verification. If his conclusions are correct, the implications for the succession could be catastrophic. The blood drained from Alexander's face. Professor Davies was one of the most respected genealogists in Europe, someone whose research had helped resolve inheritance disputes for noble families across the continent. If King Edmund had consulted him about succession issues, it meant Sebastian's claims weren't entirely baseless. There's more, Dr. Thornfield continued, her voice barely above a whisper. April 3rd. Helena Richter contacted me directly today. She claims to represent Sebastian's interests, but her questions suggest she already knows more than she should. Someone has been feeding information to Sebastian's legal team. The security breach is more serious than I initially believed. Alexander's stomach lurched. Helena Richter, Sebastian's Swiss lawyer, had been in contact with their father directly. That meant Sebastian's investigation hadn't been a recent development. It had been ongoing for months before the king's death, possibly with the king's knowledge or even cooperation. Captain Harrison entered the study with a secure tablet, his expression grim. Your Majesty, we've intercepted communications between Prince Sebastian and several European media outlets. He's planning to hold a press conference in Geneva within 48 hours. What kind of press conference? Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. According to our intelligence, he intends to present documentary evidence challenging your right to the throne. The Swiss authorities can't prevent him from speaking, as he's not technically breaking any Swiss laws. And once the information is public, Alexander didn't need Harrison to finish the sentence. Once Sebastian's claims became public, the media feeding frenzy would be unstoppable. Every tabloid, every news network, every social media platform would dissect the allegations. The monarchy's reputation, built over centuries, could be destroyed in a matter of hours. Thornfield cleared her throat nervously. Your Majesty, there's something else. I've been cross-referencing the dates in your father's journal with official palace records. On the same day your father met with Professor Davies, he also had a private meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury. No official record exists of what they discussed, but the Archbishop is the one who would officiate any coronation ceremony, Alexander finished. If father had doubts about the succession, the Archbishop would be one of the first people he'd consult. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that Alexander desperately didn't want to see. His father had spent his final months investigating the legitimacy of the royal succession. He had consulted experts, legal advisors, and religious authorities. And somehow, Sebastian had gained access to information about these investigations. Alexander's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Prime Minister Blackwood. Emergency meeting required. Parliamentary leaders are asking questions. How should we proceed? The political implications were staggering. If Sebastian's press conference raised serious doubts about Alexander's legitimacy, it could trigger a constitutional crisis. The Parliament might demand an official investigation. The Commonwealth nations could question their allegiance to the crown. The very stability of the British political system could be at risk. Captain Harrison, Alexander said, making a decision that went against every instinct he possessed, I want you to arrange a secure video call with Sebastian. No recording, no transcripts, no monitoring. I need to hear directly from him what evidence he thinks he has. Harrison's jaw tightened. Sir, that would be extremely irregular. Security protocols require... Captain, Alexander interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone born to command. I am not asking for your approval. I am giving you an order. Within an hour, the secure video connection was established. Alexander sat alone in his private office, staring at a screen that showed Sebastian in what appeared to be a Geneva hotel suite. His younger brother looked tired but determined, his usually pristine appearance slightly disheveled. Hello, Alex, Sebastian said, his voice softer than it had been during their previous call. I wasn't sure you'd agree to talk. I need to know what you think you've discovered, Alexander replied directly. No games, no dramatic revelations. Just fact. Sebastian nodded and reached for a thick folder beside him. 3 months ago, my financial advisor noticed irregularities in trust fund distributions. The amounts were small, but the pattern was unusual. Payments to research firms, genealogy services, and legal consultants, all authorized by Father during his final year. He opened the folder and held up several documents toward the camera. These are copies of contracts and payment records. Father hired Professor Davies to conduct comprehensive genealogical research on our family line. Not the official royal genealogy that's been published, a completely independent investigation using DNA analysis and documentary evidence. Alexander leaned forward, trying to read the documents through the video feed. What did Davies find? That's where it gets complicated, Sebastian continued. Davies's preliminary report raised questions about the paternity of several royal children over the past century. But before he could complete his investigation, Father died and all research was suspended. Questions about paternity. Whose paternity? Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, and Alexander could see the pain in his brother's eyes. Ours? Alex. According to Davies's initial findings, there's a possibility that either you or I, or both of us, might not be Father's biological children. The words hit Alexander like a physical assault. His vision blurred, and he gripped the edge of his desk to steady himself. The implications were devastating beyond anything he had imagined. If neither brother was the biological son of King Edmund IV, then the entire succession would be thrown into chaos. That's impossible, Alexander said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Sebastian asked sadly. Think about it, Alex. Why else would Father spend his final months conducting secret genealogical research? Why would he meet with constitutional lawyers and religious authorities? Why would he be so concerned about succession protocols? Alexander's mind raced through memories of his childhood, searching for clues he might have missed. His father had always been distant, more focused on royal duties than family relationships. Alexander had attributed this to the demands of kingship, but now he wondered if there had been deeper reasons for that emotional distance. Even if that were true, Alexander said carefully, it wouldn't necessarily change anything. Legal legitimacy doesn't require biological paternity. There are precedents. Not for the British throne, Sebastian interrupted. The succession laws are very specific about legitimate heirs. If we're not Father's biological children, then the crown should pass to Uncle Richard's line. Uncle Richard, their father's younger brother, who had died in a car accident 15 years earlier. But Richard had two sons, cousins whom Alexander barely knew, who had grown up outside the royal spotlight and had no preparation for leadership roles. Sebastian, even if Professor Davies' research raised questions, that doesn't mean his conclusions were correct. DNA testing isn't always reliable, especially with older samples, and documentary evidence can be misinterpreted. Sebastian pulled out another document. That's why Father ordered additional testing. Blood samples from both of us, taken during routine medical examinations last year. You probably don't even remember. The palace medical staff collected extra samples for comprehensive health screening. Alexander did remember. The medical examination had been more thorough than usual, with multiple blood draws and tissue samples. He had been told it was related to updating his medical records for security purposes. But now he realized it might have been part of his father's investigation. Where are those test results? Alexander asked. That's the problem, Sebastian admitted. Father died before the results were completed. The samples were sent to a private laboratory in Switzerland, the same laboratory that conducted Davies' genealogical research. But all testing was suspended when Father died, and the samples were sealed by court order. Court order? Whose court order? Helena Richter obtained it on my behalf, Sebastian explained. As soon as I learned about the testing, I had to take legal action to prevent the samples from being destroyed. They're being held in secure storage pending resolution of the succession question. Alexander felt a surge of anger. So you've known about this for months, and you're only telling me now? You've been planning to ambush me with this information? Sebastian's expression hardened. I've been trying to protect both of us, Alex. I hoped I could resolve this quietly, maybe find evidence that would put the questions to rest, but every piece of information I uncovered just raised more doubts. And now you're planning a press conference to air our family's private business to the entire world? I don't want to destroy our family, Sebastian said quietly. But I can't let you continue as king if there's a possibility you don't have the legal right to the throne. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to the British people. Alexander stared at his brother through the video screen, seeing not the rebellious spare heir who had caused so many scandals, but a man wrestling with impossible choices. Sebastian's motivations weren't entirely selfish. He genuinely believed he was protecting the integrity of the monarchy. "What do you want from me?" Alexander asked finally. "I want us to work together to find the truth," Sebastian replied. "Authorize the completion of the DNA testing. Let Professor Davies finish his genealogical research. If we're father's legitimate heirs, then the questions will be answered definitively. If we're not, then we destroy everything our family has worked to build for generations." Sebastian nodded sadly. "Maybe. Or maybe we save it by ensuring that whoever wears the crown has the legitimate right to do so." The video call ended, leaving Alexander alone with thoughts that threatened to overwhelm him. Outside his office window, he could see tourists gathering at the palace gates, taking photographs and hoping for glimpses of royal life. They had no idea that the monarchy they admired might be built on a foundation of lies and uncertainty. Dr. Thornfield knocked softly and entered with another folder. "Your Majesty, I've found additional correspondence from your father's final months, letters to and from various legal experts, genealogists, and even a private investigator." Alexander took the folder with hands that shook slightly. Each document seemed to confirm Sebastian's story. Their father had spent months investigating questions about the royal succession, hiring experts and gathering evidence for reasons that were becoming increasingly clear. One letter in particular caught Alexander's attention. It was addressed to Helena Richter and dated just 2 weeks before the king's death. In it, King Edmund wrote, "The results of the genealogical research have created a situation that requires careful handling. If the DNA testing confirms Professor Davies's conclusions, we will need to consider unprecedented options for the succession. I trust you will advise Sebastian appropriately while protecting the integrity of the crown." The letter was signed in the king's distinctive handwriting, and it carried the official royal seal. There could be no question about its authenticity. Alexander closed the folder and looked up at Dr. Beale. "Thornfield, in your professional opinion, based on everything you've seen, do you believe my father had legitimate concerns about the succession?" Dr. Thornfield removed her glasses and cleaned them carefully, a gesture Alexander recognized as her way of buying time to choose her words precisely. "Your Majesty, I believe your father discovered information that caused him great concern. Whether that information was accurate, that remains to be determined. It wasn't the reassurance Alexander had hoped for, but it was honest, and honesty, he was beginning to realize, was going to be essential for navigating the crisis that lay ahead." Captain Harrison returned with updates from the intelligence services. "Sir, we've confirmed that Prince Sebastian has scheduled his press conference for tomorrow evening, Geneva time. European media outlets are already promoting it as a major revelation about the British royal family." Alexander made a decision that surprised even himself. Cancel all security protocols aimed at preventing Sebastian's press conference. Harrison's eyes widened. "Sir? If Sebastian is determined to make these allegations public, trying to stop him will only make us look guilty. Instead, I want you to arrange for our own press conference, here at the palace, 1 hour before Sebastian's scheduled event." "What will you tell them?" Alexander stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where his ancestors had walked for centuries. "The truth," he said finally, "or at least as much of the truth as we know." The decision felt both terrifying and liberating. For his entire life, Alexander had been trained to protect the monarchy's image, to maintain dignity and discretion in all circumstances. But now, faced with questions about his very identity, he realized that transparency might be the only path forward. Thornfield gathered the documents they had been reviewing. "Your Majesty, if I may, there is one more thing you should consider. If the DNA testing proceeds and raises questions about your paternity, it will also raise questions about Prince Sebastian's paternity. You may both find yourselves in the same position." Alexander nodded grimly. It was possible that Sebastian's investigation could backfire, revealing that neither brother had the legitimate right to inherit the throne. In that case, the crown would pass to their cousins, young men who had never expected to rule, and who might be completely unprepared for the responsibility. As evening fell over London, Alexander made his final preparations for what might be the most important speech of his life. Tomorrow he would stand before the world's media and address questions about his legitimacy as king. He would acknowledge the investigation his father had begun and explain his commitment to completing it, regardless of the consequences. It was a gamble that could cost him everything: his crown, his identity, his place in history. But it was also the only choice that felt honest, and Alexander was beginning to understand that honesty might be more important than tradition, more valuable than royal privilege. The morning of the press conferences dawned gray and drizzling over London, as if the weather itself reflected the uncertainty hanging over the monarchy. Alexander stood in his private dressing room, adjusting his tie for the fourth time, while his longtime valet, Thomas, watched with concern. The elderly man had served the royal family for over 40 years and had never seen Alexander this nervous before a public appearance. "Your Majesty," Thomas said gently, "perhaps the blue tie would be more appropriate. It conveys trust and stability." Alexander looked at his reflection in the ornate mirror that had belonged to his great-grandfather. The man staring back at him looked older than his 38 years, with new lines around his eyes and a tension in his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. He wondered if this might be the last time he would dress as a king. "Trust and stability," Alexander repeated quietly. "I'm not sure those are commodities I can offer anymore, Thomas." Downstairs in the state dining room, members of Alexander's inner circle had gathered for what felt like a war council. Prime Minister Blackwood sat at the polished mahogany table, her usually perfectly arranged silver hair showing signs of stress. Beside her, Attorney General Morrison reviewed legal documents with intense concentration, while Communications Director Sarah Chen managed multiple phones and tablets, monitoring media coverage and public reaction. Dr. Thornfield entered carrying a leather portfolio filled with the documents they had discovered in the king's study. Her face was pale, and Alexander could see that she had been crying. In all their years of working together, he had never seen the composed archivist show such emotion. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I've found something else. A sealed letter addressed to you personally, dated the day before your father's death." Alexander's heart nearly stopped. A final message from his father written when the king knew he was dying and when he presumably knew the results of his investigations. With shaking hands, Alexander took the envelope, which bore his name in his father's distinctive handwriting, along with instructions, to be opened only by Prince Alexander, only in the event that questions arise regarding the royal succession. The room fell silent as Alexander carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper filled with his father's careful script. "My dear Alexander, if you are reading this letter, then the questions I have spent these final months investigating have become public knowledge. I had hoped to resolve these matters privately, to spare you and Sebastian the pain of uncertainty about your heritage and your right to the throne. The genealogical research I commissioned was prompted by certain irregularities discovered during routine archival work. Professor Davies found discrepancies in dates and locations that raised questions about the paternity of several royal children, including you and your brother. I want you to know that these questions torment me, not because I doubt my love for you both, but because I understand the implications for the monarchy. The DNA testing I ordered has been completed, but I have chosen not to review the results. That decision must be yours to make. The sealed results are in the vault at Grayson & Associates Bank, Box 247. Helena Richter has the only other key, as per my instructions to ensure neutrality in this matter. Whatever those results reveal, know this: you have been my son in every way that matters. Your dedication to duty, your compassion for others, and your commitment to service have made me proud every day of your life. The crown is not just about bloodline, it is about the person who wears it with honor and wisdom. If the DNA testing confirms that you are not my biological son, the decision about the succession must be yours. I trust your judgment above all others, and I know you will choose what is best for the kingdom, even if it comes at great personal cost. You have been a better son and a better prince than I ever deserved. Whatever you decide, you have my love and my blessing. Your devoted father, Edmund." Alexander's hands shook as he finished reading. The letter confirmed Sebastian's story, but also revealed the depth of their father's anguish over the situation. King Edmund had carried the burden of these questions alone, protecting his sons from the knowledge while trying to find a resolution. Prime Minister Blackwood broke the silence. "Your Majesty, we need to know what those DNA results say before you make any public statements." "There isn't time," Alexander replied, folding the letter carefully. "Sebastian's press conference is in 6 hours. We can't delay any longer." Attorney General Morrison leaned forward urgently. "Sir, if you acknowledge the existence of this investigation without knowing the results, you could be abdicating based on incomplete information. The constitutional implications exist regardless of what I say today." Alexander interrupted. "Sebastian is going to reveal this information whether I address it or not. At least this way I can control the narrative and demonstrate transparency." Sarah Chen looked up from her tablets with alarm. "Your Majesty, social media is already buzzing with speculation. Someone leaked information about Prince Sebastian's press conference, and conspiracy theories are spreading rapidly. We're seeing hashtags like #RoyalCrisis and #IllegalKing trending across multiple platforms. The damage was already beginning even before either press conference had taken place." Alexander realized that his window for getting ahead of the story was rapidly closing. Captain Harrison entered with a secure phone. "Sir, Prince Sebastian is calling. He says it's urgent." Alexander took the phone, wondering what new revelations his brother might have discovered. Sebastian's voice was tense and hurried. "Alex, something's happened. Helena Richter was contacted an hour ago by someone claiming to represent Uncle Richard's sons. They're threatening legal action if I proceed with the press conference. They say they have information that could change everything." Alexander's blood ran cold. Their cousins, Richard's sons, had been silent throughout the entire crisis. If they were now taking legal action, it suggested they believed they had a legitimate claim to the throne. "What kind of information?" Alexander asked. "I don't know yet, but Helena thinks they may have conducted their own investigation into the family genealogy." "Alex, this is getting bigger than just questions about our paternity. If other family members are involved, the entire succession could be challenged." The scope of the crisis was expanding beyond anything Alexander had imagined. It wasn't just about whether he and Sebastian were King Edmund's biological sons. It was about the legitimacy of the entire royal line going back potentially generations. "Sebastian, are you going to proceed with your press conference?" There was a long pause before Sebastian answered. "I have to, Alex. Too many people know about this now. If I back down, it will look like I'm being silenced, and that will only fuel more speculation. But I want you to know, I never wanted it to come to this." After the call ended, Alexander sat in contemplative silence while his advisors waited nervously. The weight of 8 centuries of monarchy rested on his shoulders, and every decision he made in the next few hours could determine whether that legacy survived or crumbled. Dr. Thornfield spoke softly. "Your Majesty, there is still time to retrieve the DNA results before your press conference. We could send someone to Geneva immediately." Alexander considered this option. Knowing the truth would certainly help him prepare his statement, but it would also force him to make decisions based on biological facts rather than moral principles. And somehow, that felt like the wrong approach. "No," he said finally. "I'm going to address the nation without knowing the test results. The British people deserve a king who acts on principle, not just on genetic privilege." Prime Minister Blackwood shook her head in dismay. "Your Majesty, that's incredibly risky." "If the DNA results contradict your statements, then I'll deal with the consequences honestly," Alexander replied. "I've spent my entire life being told that the crown is my birthright, but maybe it's time to earn the crown through actions rather than just genetics." The hours leading up to the press conference passed in a blur of activity. Speechwriters crafted multiple versions of Alexander's statement, each addressing different potential scenarios. Security teams coordinated with intelligence services to monitor public reaction and potential threats. Protocol officers prepared for every conceivable outcome, from peaceful acceptance to popular uprising. At precisely 4 o'clock London time, Alexander walked into the palace's state ballroom, which had been converted into a temporary press conference venue. Cameras from news organizations around the world focused on him as he approached the podium bearing the royal coat of arms. Behind him hung portraits of monarchs stretching back centuries, silent witnesses to what might be the most important speech in modern royal history. Alexander looked out at the assembled journalists, many of whom had covered the royal family for decades. He saw familiar faces mixed with international correspondents who had flown to London specifically for this event. The weight of their expectations and the historical significance of the moment settled over him like a heavy cloak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil, "I come before you today to address questions that have been raised regarding the royal succession and my right to occupy the throne of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth nations." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. In the back of the room, he could see Sarah Chen monitoring social media feeds, her expression growing increasingly concerned as hashtags and commentary exploded across platforms worldwide. Recent investigations have revealed that my late father, King Edmund IV, spent his final months conducting research into our family's genealogical history. This research was prompted by questions that arose during routine archival work, questions that led him to seek expert analysis and, ultimately, DNA testing to verify certain aspects of the royal lineage. Murmurs rippled through the press corps. Alexander could see reporters typing frantically and camera operators adjusting their equipment to capture every nuance of his expression. "I want to be absolutely clear about several facts," Alexander continued. "First, I was not aware of this investigation during my father's lifetime. Second, the results of the DNA testing remain sealed and have not been reviewed by me or anyone in my immediate circle. Third, my brother, Prince Sebastian, learned of this investigation through his own inquiries and has been attempting to resolve these questions privately." He took a deep breath before delivering the most difficult part of his prepared statement. "However, I also want to be clear about my position moving forward. The legitimacy of the British monarchy cannot rest solely on genetic inheritance. It must be based on the consent of the governed, the support of Parliament, and the dedication of those who serve the crown to the principles of duty, service, and justice." The boldness of this statement sent shockwaves through the assembled press. Alexander was essentially arguing that royal legitimacy came from more than bloodline, a position that challenged centuries of monarchical tradition. "Therefore," Alexander announced, "I am authorizing the immediate completion of all genealogical research and DNA testing that my father initiated. The results will be made public within 7 days, regardless of what they reveal. If those results raise questions about my biological parentage, I will address them honestly and openly. Furthermore, I am calling upon Parliament to establish a special commission to review the entire question of royal succession laws, taking into account both traditional principles and modern democratic values. The British people deserve a monarchy that serves them with unquestionable legitimacy and moral authority." Alexander concluded his statement by addressing the personal cost of his decision. "I understand that my commitment to transparency may jeopardize my own position as king, but I would rather risk the crown than allow doubt and speculation to undermine the institution of monarchy itself. The British people, and indeed the peoples of the Commonwealth, deserve better than uncertainty and secrecy." As Alexander left the podium, the press erupted with questions shouted in multiple languages. He walked steadily from the ballroom without responding, knowing that anything he said now could only complicate an already complex situation. In the private corridor outside the ballroom, Alexander was met by Captain Harrison, whose expression was grim. "Sir, initial public reaction is mixed. We're seeing both support for your transparency and criticism of your decision to address these issues publicly. More concerning, we've received credible intelligence that your cousins are preparing their own legal challenge to the succession." Alexander nodded wearily. He had known this decision would create chaos, but he had chosen transparency over certainty, principle over privilege. Now he would have to live with the consequences. In Geneva, Sebastian watched his brother's press conference from his hotel suite. Helena Richter sat beside him, taking notes and preparing for their own media event in 2 hours. Sebastian felt a mixture of pride and sorrow as he listened to Alexander's words. Pride in his brother's courage and integrity. Sorrow for the pain this crisis was causing their family. "He's handling this better than I expected," Sebastian told Helena. "He's also made our job more difficult," the lawyer replied pragmatically. "By announcing his commitment to transparency and calling for parliamentary review, he's essentially challenged us to prove that our concerns are legitimate. We'll need to present concrete evidence, not just speculation. Sebastian looked at the sealed envelope containing the DNA test results that Helena had retrieved from the Swiss bank earlier that day. Inside that envelope were answers that could change history or confirm that their father's investigation had been based on false concerns. Helena, what if we're wrong? What if the DNA results confirm that Alexander is father's legitimate heir? We'll have put the monarchy through this crisis for nothing. Helena Richter had built her reputation on handling complex inheritance disputes, and she understood the emotional toll such cases took on families. Sebastian, the question isn't whether you're right or wrong about the biology. The question is whether the institution of monarchy can survive questions about its legitimacy. Your brother seems to believe that transparency will strengthen the crown. We're about to find out if he's correct. As the sun set over both London and Geneva, two brothers prepared to complete a process that would either destroy or transform one of the world's oldest surviving monarchies. The DNA results would be revealed within days, but the real test would be whether the British people could accept a crown based on merit and service, rather than just hereditary privilege. The ancient institution of monarchy was about to face its greatest challenge in centuries, and the outcome would determine not just who wore the crown, but what the crown itself represented in the modern world. The DNA results arrived on a rain-soaked Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Alexander's historic press conference. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, Britain's most respected forensic geneticist, carried the sealed documents into Windermere Palace with the solemnity of someone delivering a death sentence. She had spent 3 sleepless days triple-checking her analysis, knowing that her findings would reshape the British monarchy forever. Alexander waited in his father's study, the same room where this crisis had begun. Beside him sat Prime Minister Blackwood, Attorney General Morrison, and Dr. Hamasa Thornfield. Captain Harrison stood by the door, coordinating with security teams preparing for multiple scenarios. The tension in the room was suffocating. Dr. Hayes, Alexander said, his voice steadier than he felt. Before you share your findings, I want you to know that whatever you've discovered will be made public within the hour. There will be no cover-ups, no selective disclosure, no political manipulation of the truth. Dr. Hayes nodded gravely and opened her leather portfolio. Your Majesty, I've conducted the most comprehensive genetic analysis possible using the samples collected during your father's investigation. I've also incorporated tissue samples from King Edmund IV's remains with appropriate legal authorization to ensure absolute accuracy. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The results are unprecedented in royal history. Alexander's hands gripped the arms of his chair. Please continue. Your Majesty, the DNA analysis confirms that you are indeed the biological son of King Edmund IV. Your paternal lineage is unquestionable. Relief flooded through Alexander, but Dr. Hayes wasn't finished. However, Prince Sebastian is not the king's biological son. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Alexander felt his world shift as the implications became clear. Sebastian's investigation had been partially correct. There was indeed a question of legitimacy in the royal succession, but it affected Sebastian, not Alexander. Furthermore, Dr. Hayes continued, the genetic analysis reveals that Prince Sebastian's biological father is Lord Christopher Pemberton. Alexander's blood turned to ice. Lord Pemberton had been his father's closest friend and private secretary for over 20 years. He had been a fixture at royal events, a trusted advisor, and someone the family had considered part of their inner circle. He had died in a skiing accident 5 years earlier, taking this secret to his grave. Prime Minister Blackwood leaned forward urgently. Dr. Hayes, you're absolutely certain of these findings? I've run the analysis 3 times using different methodologies. Dr. Sixey responded. Hayes replied. The probability of error is less than 1 in 10 million. Prince Sebastian is Lord Pemberton's biological son, conceived during a period when Lord Pemberton was serving as the Queen's personal advisor during a particularly difficult time in the royal marriage. Alexander's mother, Queen Isabella, had died in a car accident when he was 16. She had been beloved by the public, but had struggled privately with the pressures of royal life. Alexander remembered his parents going through a rough patch when he was about 10 years old, the same time Sebastian would have been conceived. Dr. Thornfield spoke quietly, This explains the irregularities that prompted your father's investigation. The dates and locations that raised questions in the genealogical research would have pertained to Prince Sebastian's birth records. Alexander stood and walked to the window, his mind reeling. Sebastian's entire crusade for truth had been based on the belief that both brothers might be illegitimate. Instead, the investigation had revealed that Sebastian alone carried questionable parentage, while Alexander's right to the throne was actually confirmed beyond doubt. "Where is Sebastian now?" Alexander asked. Captain Harrison checked his secure tablet. "He's en route to London, sir. His flight from Geneva lands in 2 hours. He doesn't know about these results yet. Alexander made a decision that would define his character as king. I want to tell him personally. Arrange for us to meet privately at the airport. No media, no officials, just the 2 brothers." "Your Majesty," Attorney General Morrison interjected, "you should consider the legal implications. Prince Sebastian's illegitimate status could affect his position in the line of succession, his royal titles, even his financial support from the royal trust." "The legal implications can wait," Alexander replied firmly. "Right now, I need to be a brother, not a king." The drive to Heathrow Airport gave Alexander time to process the magnitude of what they had discovered. Sebastian's entire identity would be shattered by these results. The man who had spent months investigating questions of legitimacy was about to learn that he was the one without legitimate claim to royal blood. But Alexander also understood something that the lawyers and politicians might miss. Sebastian's illegitimate birth didn't make him less of a brother or less deserving of love and respect. If anything, Sebastian's dedication to finding the truth, even when it might harm his own interests, demonstrated the kind of integrity that should be valued in any royal family. Alexander waited alone in a private airport lounge as Sebastian's plane taxied to the terminal. Through the large windows, he could see media vans gathering in the distance, held back by security cordons, but ready to capture any images of the brothers' reunion. Sebastian entered the lounge looking exhausted but determined. He carried a briefcase that presumably contained his own copies of documents and evidence. The brothers stood facing each other for a long moment, both knowing that their relationship was about to change forever. "Hello, Alex," Sebastian said quietly. "I assume you've seen the DNA results?" Alexander nodded. "Have you?" "Helena showed them to me on the plane." Sebastian's voice was steady, but Alexander could see the pain in his eyes. "So it turns out I was right about there being questions of legitimacy in our family. I just had the wrong target." "Sebastian," Alexander began, but his brother held up a hand. "It's okay, Alex. I've had 3 hours to process this. I know what it means." Sebastian sat heavily in one of the leather chairs. "I'm not your brother. I'm not father's son. I'm the product of an affair that nearly destroyed our parents' marriage." "You are absolutely my brother," Alexander said fiercely. "DNA doesn't change the fact that we grew up together, that we share memories and experiences, that we've been through everything together. Biology doesn't define family." Sebastian smiled sadly. "That's very generous of you to say. But we both know that biology defines royal succession. These results confirm that you are the rightful king, and that my entire investigation was misguided." Alexander sat across from his brother, choosing his words carefully. "Sebastian, your investigation wasn't misguided. You were pursuing the truth, and the truth matters. The fact that it didn't turn out the way you expected doesn't diminish the integrity of your actions. But it does diminish everything else, doesn't it?" Sebastian asked. "My titles, my position in the succession, my role in the royal family. I'm about to become the illegitimate brother who challenged the rightful king." Alexander had been thinking about this exact issue during the drive to the airport. The traditional response would be to quietly manage Sebastian's change in status, perhaps reducing his public profile while maintaining financial support. But Alexander had a different vision. "Actually, I have a proposition for you," Alexander said. "The DNA results will be made public this afternoon, just as I promised. But I'm also going to announce that I'm appointing you as special advisor to the Crown for democratic reform." Sebastian looked up in surprise. "What does that mean?" "It means I want you to lead the parliamentary commission I announced last week. I want you to help redesign the monarchy for the modern era, focusing on merit and service rather than just bloodline. Your experience with this investigation, your commitment to truth, and your understanding of both traditional and democratic principles make you the ideal person to guide these reforms." Sebastian stared at his brother in astonishment. "Alex, You're offering me a position of significant influence after I've spent months trying to undermine your legitimacy. You weren't trying to undermine my legitimacy, Alexander corrected. You were trying to ensure that whoever held the throne deserved it. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need as we modernize the monarchy. The conversation was interrupted by Captain Harrison, who entered with urgent news. Your Majesties, we have a developing situation. Your cousins, Prince Edward and Prince James, have filed an injunction in the High Court challenging any reforms to the succession laws. They're claiming that they should be consulted on any changes that might affect their position in the line of succession. Alexander sighed. Their cousins, Uncle Richard's sons, were apparently not content to remain in the background. If they were taking legal action, it suggested they had their own ambitions regarding the throne. What kind of injunction? Alexander asked. They're seeking to prevent any parliamentary commission from proceeding until questions about the entire family's legitimacy can be resolved, Harrison explained. Apparently, they've conducted their own genealogical research and believe there may be additional questions about royal paternity going back several generations. Sebastian and Alexander exchanged glances. The crisis they thought they were resolving was actually expanding to encompass the broader royal family. If their cousins had evidence of other illegitimate births in previous generations, the entire succession could be thrown into chaos. There's more, Harrison continued grimly. The cousins have hired media consultants and are planning their own press conference this evening. Early reports suggest they intend to challenge not just the current succession, but the legitimacy of the entire Windsor line. Alexander stood and walked to the window, watching planes take off and land while considering his options. The monarchy was under attack from multiple directions. His own brother's investigation, his cousin's legal challenges, and growing public questions about the institution's relevance in the modern era. But as he watched the ordered chaos of the airport, with its complex systems working together to move people safely around the world, Alexander realized that crisis could also create opportunity. The monarchy had survived for over 1,000 years by adapting to changing circumstances. This current challenge might force the kind of evolution that would ensure the crown's survival for another 1,000 years. Sebastian, Alexander said, turning back to his brother, I need to ask something of you that goes beyond official appointments or royal duties. What? I need you to help me save the monarchy. Not the old version based on bloodline and tradition, but a new version based on service and democratic legitimacy. We're facing the biggest crisis in royal history, and I can't handle it alone. Sebastian considered this request carefully. The man who had spent months investigating his brother's right to rule was now being asked to help preserve the institution they both served. What did you have in mind? Sebastian asked finally. First, we present a united front. The DNA results will be released as promised, but we emphasize that family relationships are about more than genetics. Second, we accelerate the reform process. Instead of a slow parliamentary commission, we propose immediate constitutional changes that modernize the monarchy while preserving its essential functions. Alexander paused, then delivered the most radical part of his proposal. And third, we offer the British people a choice. We put the monarchy's future to a national referendum. If they want to keep the crown, it will be because they've chosen it, not because they inherited it. Sebastian's eyes widened. No monarch in British history had ever voluntarily submitted the crown to popular approval. It was either political genius or political suicide, and probably both. Alex, you're proposing to risk everything on the chance that the British people will choose to keep the monarchy. I'm proposing to base the crown's legitimacy on the consent of the governed rather than just genetic inheritance. If we can't earn the people's support, then maybe we don't deserve to rule. As the brothers prepared to return to London and face the media, both understood that they were embarking on the most dangerous gamble in royal history. The DNA results had answered one set of questions but raised many others. The monarchy's survival would depend not on bloodline or tradition, but on their ability to demonstrate that the crown still served a purpose in the modern world. The institution that had survived Viking raids, civil wars, 2 world wars, and countless political upheavals was about to face its ultimate test, democracy itself. 6 months after the DNA results shattered the traditional foundations of the British monarchy, the nation prepared for the most extraordinary election in its history, a referendum on the future of the crown itself. The question on the ballot was deceptively simple. Should the United Kingdom maintain its constitutional monarchy under the reformed succession laws proposed by King Alexander I? The campaign had been unlike anything in British political history. Instead of political parties fighting for control of government, the debate centered on whether the monarchy should exist at all, and if so, what form it should take in the 21st century. Alexander stood in the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street, meeting with Prime Minister Blackwood and the leaders of all major political parties. The room that had witnessed crucial decisions during 2 world wars, the Suez Crisis, and Brexit now hosted discussions about the monarchy's survival. "The polling numbers are closer than we anticipated," Prime Minister Blackwood reported, reviewing the latest data from multiple polling organizations. Support for maintaining the monarchy stands at 52%, opposition at 43%, with 5% undecided. It's within the margin of error. Alexander nodded calmly, though internally he felt the weight of 8 centuries of royal history resting on his shoulders. The reforms he and Sebastian had proposed were radical by traditional standards, but moderate compared to complete abolition of the monarchy. The new succession laws eliminated male preference, established merit-based criteria for royal duties, created parliamentary oversight of royal finances, and most controversially, required each monarch to face a confidence vote from Parliament every 25 years. It was constitutional monarchy adapted for the democratic age. Sebastian entered the room carrying a stack of briefing papers and looking more energetic than Alexander had seen him in years. His new role as special advisor for democratic reform had transformed him from a rebellious spare heir into one of the monarchy's most effective advocates. The irony wasn't lost on either brother. "The university campuses are largely supportive," Sebastian reported. "Young people seem to appreciate the transparency we've demonstrated and the reforms we're proposing. The challenge is with older voters who see any change as a betrayal of tradition." Lord Chancellor Morrison looked up from his legal documents. "The constitutional implications remain complex. If the referendum fails, we'll need immediate legislation to establish a Republican government structure. The transition would be unprecedented and potentially chaotic." Alexander had spent sleepless nights considering this possibility. Failure of the referendum wouldn't just mean the end of his reign. It would mean the end of an institution that had provided stability and continuity for over a millennium. The economic implications alone were staggering, from tourism revenue to the Commonwealth relationships that depended on shared loyalty to the crown. "What's the latest from the opposition campaign?" Alexander asked. Sarah Chen, who had expanded her role to encompass both royal communications and referendum strategy, consulted her tablet. "The Republican alliance is focusing on cost and relevance. Their main argument is that the monarchy is an expensive anachronism that has no place in modern democracy. They're particularly effective on social media, where they're reaching younger voters with messages about inequality and inherited privilege." Alexander understood their arguments because he had wrestled with the same questions himself. How could an institution based on hereditary privilege justify its existence in an era of democratic equality? His answer was that the monarchy could evolve to become a symbol of service and continuity rather than privilege and power. But convincing millions of voters of that proposition was proving more difficult than he had anticipated. The meeting was interrupted by Captain Harrison, who entered with urgent intelligence. "Your Majesty, we've intercepted communications suggesting that your cousins, Prince Edward and Prince James, are planning to announce their own political party tomorrow. They're calling it the Traditional Monarchy Party, and they're advocating for a return to pre-reform succession laws." Alexander closed his eyes in frustration. Throughout the referendum campaign, his cousins had remained largely silent, allowing speculation to build about their intentions. If they were now launching a political party, it suggested they intended to challenge both the reformed monarchy and any potential Republican government. "What's their platform?" Sebastian asked. "According to our intelligence, they're arguing that the current reforms go too far, and that any monarchy that submits to popular approval isn't a real monarchy at all," Harrison explained. "They're positioning themselves as defenders of traditional royal authority." The complexity of the political landscape was staggering. Voters now had to choose between maintaining a reformed constitutional monarchy, abolishing the monarchy entirely in favor of a republic, or potentially supporting a return to more traditional royal authority under different leadership. Alexander made a decision that would define the final phase of the campaign. I want to arrange a public debate. Me, the leader of the Republican Alliance, and my cousin Prince Edward. 3 visions for Britain's future presented directly to the voters. Prime Minister Blackwood looked alarmed. Your Majesty, that's extremely risky. You'd be giving equal platform to people actively trying to remove you from power. The British people deserve to hear all perspectives before making this decision, Alexander replied. If I can't defend the reformed monarchy in open debate, then maybe it doesn't deserve to survive. Sebastian smiled at his brother's courage. I think it's brilliant. You've always been most effective when you're speaking directly to people rather than through formal statements and ceremony. The debate was scheduled for the following Sunday evening, just 1 week before the referendum vote. The venue was the historic Guildhall in the City of London, a location chosen for its symbolic importance as the seat of London's ancient democratic traditions. As the date approached, Alexander prepared more intensively than for any speech in his life. He studied economic data about the monarchy's costs and benefits, researched constitutional law and democratic theory, and practiced defending his vision for a modernized crown that could serve the people rather than ruling over them. The night before the debate, Alexander sat in his private study at Windsor Castle, reviewing his notes one final time. The walls were lined with portraits of monarchs stretching back centuries, men and women who had ruled by divine right and hereditary privilege. Tomorrow, he would argue that their successor should rule only with the people's consent. Sebastian joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea and looking uncharacteristically nervous. Are you ready for tomorrow? As ready as I can be, Alexander replied. Though I keep wondering what all these ancestors would think about a king who's voluntarily submitted the crown to popular vote. I think they'd be proud, Sebastian said quietly. You're trying to save the monarchy by transforming it. That takes more courage than just defending the status quo. Alexander looked at his brother, the man who wasn't his biological sibling, but had become his closest ally and advisor. The DNA revelation that had initially threatened to tear them apart had ultimately brought them closer together. Sebastian, regardless of what happens tomorrow or in the referendum, I want you to know that working with you these past months has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Sebastian raised his teacup in a mock toast to the most interesting royal crisis in British history. To family regardless of genetics, Alexander replied. The next evening, millions of viewers across the United Kingdom and Commonwealth nations tuned in to watch a debate that would determine the monarchy's fate. Alexander sat at a curved table alongside Dr. Patricia Williams, leader of the Republican Alliance, and his cousin Prince Edward, representing traditional monarchist views. The moderator, veteran journalist Sir David Thornton, wasted no time in addressing the central question. Your Majesty, why should the British people choose to keep an institution based on inherited privilege in the 21st century? Alexander leaned forward, speaking directly to the camera and the millions watching at home. Sir David, that question assumes the monarchy must remain based on inherited privilege. What I'm proposing is fundamentally different. A constitutional monarchy that earns its legitimacy through service, accountability, and democratic oversight. He outlined the reform package: regular parliamentary confidence votes, transparent financial reporting, merit-based criteria for royal duties, and constitutional limits on royal power. This isn't about preserving privilege. It's about creating an institution that can provide stability and continuity while remaining accountable to the people. Dr. Williams responded forcefully. But why do we need any hereditary institution at all? Why can't Britain follow the example of other successful democracies and elect our head of state? The money spent on royal ceremonies and palaces could fund hospitals and schools. The economic argument was powerful, and Alexander had prepared carefully for it. Dr. Foley, Williams, the monarchy contributes far more to the economy than it costs. Tourism, trade promotion, and international relationships generate billions in revenue. But more importantly, elected presidents can become partisan figures. The constitutional monarchy provides political stability and national unity that transcends party politics. Prince Edward, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. His argument was passionate but traditional. Both of you are missing the essential point. Monarchy isn't a business arrangement or a political convenience. It's a sacred trust, ordained by centuries of tradition and divine appointment. The moment we submit the crown to popular vote, we destroy its mystical authority. Alexander turned to face his cousin directly. Edward. Mystical authority might have worked in medieval times, but modern citizens expect their institutions to be accountable and responsive. The crown's authority should come from serving the people, not from claims of divine appointment. The debate continued for 90 minutes, covering everything from constitutional law to the cost of royal weddings. Alexander found himself defending not just the reformed monarchy but the institution's entire relevance to modern Britain. In the final segment, Sir David asked each participant to make a closing statement. Prince Edward spoke first, making an emotional appeal to tradition and continuity. Dr. Williams followed with a passionate argument for democratic equality and republican government. Alexander spoke last, looking directly into the camera with the sincerity that had always been his greatest strength as a public figure. My fellow citizens, this referendum isn't just about preserving or abolishing the monarchy. It's about what kind of country we want to be. The reformed constitutional monarchy I'm proposing can provide stability in uncertain times, represent our values on the world stage, and serve as a symbol of national unity that transcends political divisions. He paused, then delivered the most personal part of his appeal. I didn't choose to be born into the royal family, but I have chosen to dedicate my life to serving this nation and its people. The question before you is whether you believe that service has value, and whether you trust me and my successors to continue earning that service through accountability, transparency, and dedication to democratic principles. Alexander concluded with words that would be remembered long after the referendum. I'm not asking for your loyalty because of my bloodline or my titles. I'm asking for your trust because of my commitment to be the kind of monarch that a modern democracy deserves. The debate ended, but the real decision would come in 7 days, when voters entered polling stations across the United Kingdom. The future of one of the world's oldest institutions hung in the balance, dependent on the democratic choice of the people it had governed for centuries. Alexander returned to Windsor Castle that night, knowing he had done everything possible to present his case. The monarchy's survival would now depend on whether millions of individual voters believed that an ancient institution could successfully adapt to serve modern democratic values. The referendum result would determine not just Alexander's personal fate, but the direction of British society for generations to come. In submitting the crown to popular approval, he had risked everything on the belief that democracy and monarchy could coexist, and that the British people would choose continuity with reform over either stagnant tradition or complete revolutionary change. As he walked through the castle corridors where dozens of monarchs had lived and died, Alexander understood that he might be the last king to occupy these rooms. But he also understood that some principles were worth risking everything to defend, and the principle of democratic accountability was one of them. The final week before the referendum would determine whether his gamble had been political genius or the end of a 1,000-year dynasty. Either way, Alexander knew he had chosen integrity over certainty and transparency over tradition. The rest would be up to the people to decide.